Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, and today we have a writer who's joining us all the way from Boston, leaving behind a very large family, to chat with us about her first novel. And the title of this first novel is The Unfinished Work of Elizabeth D. The author, Nichole Bernier, and it is published by Crown Books. Thank you for coming all this way.
Thank you so much for having me, Jim.
This is a very an unusual book in a couple of ways. To me, the most obvious is that one of the main characters is dead at the start.
It's a small impediment.
Yeah. Oh, I'd really like to fall in love with that character, but she's dead. Mm. Where did you get that idea? And didn't your agent tell you it wouldn't sell?
I was told many things, and I changed some of my book to suit that, and some I did not. The book was actually inspired by the loss of a friend in September 11th, and by my experience also serving as the family spokesperson for the media, so they wouldn't have to field the phone calls and explain over and over again who she had been. And after I was done doing this, I was really humbled and awed sort of by the responsibility of defining a person's life in sound bites. And it sort of was a haunting thing that affected me for years afterwards, wondering how my friend would have wanted to be described. What would she think that her legacy should have been?
Yeah. What kind of job am I doing?
Exactly. You know, are those the things that she thought were the most salient details of who she had been? And not to get maudlin about it, but it really kind of hung with me for a few years after that. And that's where the idea came in, the idea of how well do we really know the people that we're close to in our life, and that we all have parts of ourselves that we don't share openly that might actually be a significant part of ourselves.
And that's the real central question, isn't it? How well do we know the people that we think we know very, very well?
And it doesn't have to be a big, dark, dirty secret. It can just be small, hidden fears and aspirations and things that we all wish we had done that we sort of downplay, or things that we see as flaws in ourselves that we're not proud of and we just don't show to the world.
The character who's deceased as the novel starts is Elizabeth, and the appearance that she gives to the world, at least as her friends see it, is a person of great honesty, courage, openness, and, complete in herself, not, grasping or anything like that. I mean, it seems to me that you've got to be that kind of person to take over the Playgroup in a suburb of Connecticut. Mm-hmm. So she really seems to be totally together, doesn't she?
Well, she exudes that quiet competence of someone who kind of can rally other people around her because she's unflappable. And so when the other main character meets her, the main character, Kate, who is living... Kate, yeah. She meets her, and they are all thrown together as playgroup moms when they've all had their first children. And it's a common thing that's done in suburbs, oftentimes through a newcomers organization or something like that. And it's an interesting construct for fiction because you're put together with these people and you only have one thing in common with them, on the surface at least, and that's that you all have a baby. And so the question is, how much beyond that do you go in terms of getting to know one another? And do you share the fact that here you are as first-time mothers, and maybe you're not so confident about the job that you're doing handling these little people? Yeah,
you have that in common in food fights and stuff like that. Also, the whole business of, it seems to me, at least in the case of the two main characters, of what did you give up to become a mother and part of a playgroup? And I think in both cases of the women in this book, there's a sense, at least I picked up a sense that they've stepped down from a career, from possibility of fame as a painter in one case, as a pastry chef. And here they are in this playgroup.
Well, to varying degrees, I think that's a decision that it's a very personal one for women, how you are going to handle the other parts of you, the you-ness of you, whether it's career aspirations or even running marathons, whatever really made you tick. Once you have children, you really need to share yourself completely with the family. And for some people, that means staying at home. For some people, it means continuing to work and trying to juggle it both. And what I thought was interesting to me in the novel is to get at two people who wanted to be very present for their families, but also had this other parts of themselves that they were trying to juggle alongside with it.
And the difficulties thereof.
Right.
I mean, this is not an easy path that women are involved with. I don't know whether to say forced into or in many cases freely chosen, I would guess.
I mean, the characters in my book absolutely freely chose what they were doing, but they were really struggling in their own ways to express themselves and to have meaningful work continue after they were staying home. But because of the nature of playgroups and people that you don't know terribly well, sometimes you feel like you need to look like the perfect mother or the perfect woman, whatever that means, and that if you show too much aspiration for your career or work when you're surrounded by other people that are not pursuing those same goals, it might that might not be how you would want them to perceive you.
Precisely. You would want them to perceive you as something quite flexible and giving and making all things happen at once.
But how honest is that portrait? None of us are perfect. None of us are Mary Poppins.
More than a couple of years ago, we were talking about books with titles as the main title or as a subtitle, using the terrible phrase, super mom. That ain't true. And this book really gets at that in a very entertaining and moving way. We'll look at some more aspects of this book when we get back.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
The Unfinished Work of Elizabeth D. That's the title of today's novel. The author with us, Nichole Bernier, and the publisher is Crown Books. And Vanessa Diffenbach, a woman who has written bestsellers like The Language of Flowers. And we did that book right here in this studio, I think. I love that book.
It's a lovely book.
Yeah.
It's set in San Francisco, actually.
Yes, it is. Yeah, I was just going to say
she
that.
grew up around here.
All about the Flower Mart.
Absolutely. It's a wonderful book.
Which isn't far from where we're sitting right now. At any rate, about your book, and that's more important than other stuff. She has said, an absorbing, bittersweet novel that examines the vast gray area between protecting and deceiving the ones we love. That seems to be an accurate reading. Do you see it that way? I mean, as far as you understand your own book, how would you sum it up?
That really gets at the heart of the question. As far as plot goes with the book, it takes place in the year following September 11th, and it's a story about a woman who inherits the journals of a friend who has died, and she realizes that she didn't know her friend nearly as well as she thought, including where her friend was really going when she died. So it's about marriage and friendship, and it's about the facets of ourselves that we show one another and what we keep private and what it costs us to keep those parts of ourselves private.
There's sufficient indication, at least her husband thinks, that she was flying away to have an affair or to be with somebody with whom she's having an affair. That kind of, shadows. It's like a gray shadow over so much that's said and thought in this book, particularly by the husband.
Well, especially since she was such a perfect mother. I mean, in some ways, she was truly kind of a prototype of a very dedicated mother and wife. And this is disturbing to him. He's only seen a mention of it in the one journal that she had left outside in her nightstand that was not locked away in her trunk, that there was mention of a man where she was going, a man named Michael. And that's the only hint that he has. And it's so inconceivable that someone like Elizabeth would be doing something, going off the reservation in that way, that it's very disturbing to him. But he responds, he's a man who avoids emotional difficulties, and he would prefer to put his head in the sand and retain his feelings and thoughts about his life the way it had been. So he chooses to decide that that's not really possible and sort of just hand the journals over to the woman they're supposed to go to and decide, no, I don't need to consider that.
This man's name is David.
Yes.
And I grew at certain moments in the book to dislike him a lot. I found it very unlikable that with all that they had as a couple and as a family, as parents and so forth, that he would focus on this one possibility, that in some ways, sometimes, somehow, she had been unfaithful or was about to be. Mm-hmm. That really annoyed the hell out of me.
Well, it was a tidbit right at the end, and it was the only thing that was left outside for him to see. I think he almost chose not to believe it. Actually, in the beginning, he's just sort of glossing it over and saying, no, that doesn't fit in line with what I see. So he hands the trunks over to Kate, and she takes them away on vacation.
And that's when he really...
And then it kicks in for him. And I think his growth trajectory in the course of the novel is the most interesting one to me to write, because he starts off as being one sort of man who's very emotionally unavailable and would prefer just to skate on the surface of things. And he really comes into his own over the course of the summer and starts to feel that Elizabeth's things are his, because her life is his life as well, and he's the one that's still here. And he really kind of pulls himself up and stands a lot taller and stronger and becomes quite a different man by the end of the book.
I'll buy that. I'm not mad at him anymore. And he's the professional golfer.
He is. That was a lot of fun to do. I had been a golf and ski editor at Condé Nast Traveler magazine when I was in my 20s, and I am a mediocre golfer at best, but I've always been intrigued with the game, and it was very fun for me to research more deeply what it takes to become a professional golfer and what happens when you're only a middling golfer. What do you do when you're kind of floundering on the tour, and how does one fall off the tour and then get back on? So his whole growth professionally was fascinating for me to learn, and that's the fun of being an author, frankly. You learn new careers and research them. Yeah.
Did you ever do anything like Kris does for a living? Kris, who is Kate's husband? And I'm not sure exactly what he does.
Well, he works for a hotel development firm, and what he does is he travels around the world buying up troubled properties and restoring them to become part of his company's flag properties, or selling them off to another one and fixing them up. I worked for Condé Nast Traveler for some time, so I covered the hotel industry. So I don't know it from an investment perspective, but I've written news features about the hotel business along with the airline business and many of those other kinds of aspects of travel.
That's the other thing that's going on in this novel, and which I find very fascinating, and that is that it is the story about Kate and Elizabeth and what little Kate really knows about Elizabeth, her, quote, best friend, perhaps. But beyond that, it's also, I think, the story of two marriages, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And I'll tell you, I think what influenced me most in that is my favorite all-time novel is Crossing to Safety by Wallace Stegner. Mm-hmm. And it is a beautiful and stunningly written story. It's not trendy. It was back in the 1980s. He actually won the Pulitzer for Angle of Repose, not for Crossing to Safety. But it's a story of two marriages, two sets of friends throughout their whole entire lives. And it goes back and forth in time, looking at these people. And all you know is that someone is dying, but you don't know who or why at the end. And then it goes chapter by chapter. But what it really shows us is that the personality traits we had in our 20s that made us wonderful and maybe not so wonderful, how they change throughout our lives and become better or more brittle. And I loved those examinations of marriage and friendship together. And I think I sort of had that in the back of my mind always as the two couples.
Well, it really works beautifully. And at the end, you feel as though you have been somehow involved in these two marriages as well as this one powerful friendship. And the other thing is that there's a lot of family realism. I think I don't know what else to say about it. I mean, there's so much about kids and what they do and they don't do, providing for them, how they dominate, how parents have to find time to have something going on between them, as well as all that has to go on between them and the kids.
It's a juggling act for sure.
Yeah, it's very, very realistic, and it's a wonderful read. And the reason it's a wonderful read is that this experienced writer that we have with us is writing her first novel. And when we come back, we're going to find out how well she's done. Stay tuned.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter @JimFosterCoc and email Jim Foster, COC@gmail.com.
That is I. The book that I've read this week is The Unfinished Work of Elizabeth D. It's a novel by Nichole Bernier, a very experienced writer, but this is her first novel, which you should be congratulated. And some important people have been doing just that. J. Courtney Sullivan, the New York Times best-selling author of a book called Maine. This is what she has to say. Well, there was a catcher one time. Never mind.
Well, the J throws you off.
All right. She has to say, I love this bittersweet novel, which manages to be both a compelling mystery and a wise meditation on friendship, marriage, and motherhood in an age of great anxiety. And I think we'll leave the mystery to be a mystery. We won't talk.
I think that's best.
I think it is best. What I do want, though, is for you, if you can take a few minutes and share some of the writing with us and context where you're reading from.
Sure. And you set it up well by mentioning the anxiety. The book takes place the summer after September 11th. And even though Elizabeth did not die in the terrorist attacks, Kate is very much affected by the sense of anxiety in the world, the responsibility of being a parent in uncertain times. And she's trying not to show that because she's a bit ashamed of this. She sees it as a source of shame. So in this section, she's about to go out to her anniversary dinner with her husband. They were on vacation. And she's wondering what they're going to talk about because they don't go out quite that often anymore. And she's also trying to look as if she's not becoming unhinged.
This is a parent's problem. I'm too old for this, but at any rate, I can remember back. What the hell are we going to talk about?
Without the kids to be sitting in the middle.
Yeah. Okay.
Of course, it never happens to me. If my husband's listening, never, really, never. We're beyond that. We're at year 14 now. All right, so we're going to begin with Kate thinking about going out to dinner that night with her husband.
Okay.
She should have been looking forward to dinner, great food prepared and cleared by someone else. She would style her hair and put on her pink sundress, the one too feminine for her taste, but that Kris always liked. They would have a glass of wine and comment upon the bar crowd and have uninterrupted conversation that was broad and worldly like the old days. Her edgy humor would return, and he'd smile at her in the loose way that showed pleasure unrelated to his work. And when they returned to the bungalow, the sitter would be hastily paid, and there would be no flossing before bed. But that apathy was creeping in again, the sense she'd had lately that things didn't quite live up to their billing, so why bother? It was the same ambivalence and letdown she'd felt a few weeks before out to dinner with friends. She genuinely liked the women, other mothers from the preschool, but she'd had a sense of dislocation all evening. Kids' activities, home renovations, none of it mattered. She was unable to shake the sense that none of it could be counted upon to last. She'd started feeling this way after Elizabeth's death, but instead of fading as the months passed, it intensified. Sometimes it was a fog, a sense that she had not a single thought in her head worth sharing. Sometimes it was a growing panic that at any moment something could go very wrong. She'd always been conscious of her family's safety, but this was different. Danger was everywhere and nowhere, immediate and elusive, and no one was prepared. It was as if she alone could smell it, subtle as the metallic first moments of rain. She hadn't said anything to Kris, unable to imagine it, but she could imagine his response. After he stopped smiling, because surely his first thought would be that she was kidding, his look would change from one of identification to one of sympathy. He would suggest that maybe she should find someone to talk to, because it was quite a thing to lose a friend, and, well, maybe everything that had followed in September had hit her especially hard, too. The fact of his suggesting it would be enormous, because he was an own bootstrap sort of man, and the word therapy was not part of his lexicon. That was her fear, not professional help, which had occurred to her, but she believed wasn't necessary, but that Kris would look at her and see instability and weakness. It had been a long time since they'd gone out to dinner together, just the two of them. She could envision a staggered silence, one line of conversation after another failing to catch hold, until they finally chatted about the weather expected the next day and whether to go to the beach. There were many evenings back home when they moved around and past one another, wordless for hours at their own tasks. She was thankful for the few hours of quiet focus, but at moments she felt the loss of quiet companionship, a like-minded silence. Their daily lives were so different now. She could no longer say they were of like mind. Was it possible, she wondered, to have solitude together? She tried to imagine what he would do if after dinner she went to his study back home with her book or her laptop and sat on the couch there instead of in the living room, as they had in the early years. He might glance over the top of his computer with a look of surprise and then a smile of welcome. Hey there. or there might be a moment's hesitation. She'd sit quietly nearby, each of them feeling the weight of the other in the room and a dampening of his or her own thoughts, each looking up expectantly when the other shifted in a chair or looked off in the middle distance. She might offer a snippet of commentary about something she was reading, but it would not be easily understood out of context. After an hour or so, she would stand and stretch, murmur that she thought she'd call it a night, and the following night she'd go back to the living room. It was a gift, solitude, but solitude with another person, that was an art.
What a notion. Solitude together. That's an art.
That's marriage.
Yeah. It really is. It really is. One of the other notions that you bring up in that reading early on is that the many things of parenthood, taking care of the house, taking care of the kids, and all that kind of stuff at this point in her life, none of it mattered. None of it mattered. And that's an awful place to be. Part of that, you seem to say in the novel, is caused by 9/11. But part of it is, I don't know, just human nature that it gets to that point where all the things that you spend so much time on, you have doubts from time to time whether it matters.
I think for Kate, this really gets to the heart of what it is. It's almost a sort of a post-traumatic stress response that everything that consumes her time, whether it's home renovations, kids' activities, changing diapers, that it is elusive and fleeting and it can't be relied upon to last. And that's what she's afraid of because it can be gone in a moment, just like her friend Elizabeth was gone in a moment. And that's what she's having trouble dealing with in light conversation and banter with people, that the most of what they spend their time doing is just something that's fleeting that you can't count upon to stay.
This is a great book to read and think about. And it's called The Unfinished Work of Elizabeth D. We've been talking to its author, Nichole Bernier. This has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at Jim Foster COC and email jimfostercoc@gmail.com.